All right, so we are here today with Whitney Jones. She was on the short list to be one of our first six guests because her story is one that I have followed for quite a while. It has inspired me as a human to be a better human. And just life, work, kids, all those four-letter words we'll say, have led us to, I think it's been almost 7 months. We've been trying to find this day. So
Yeah.
tell us about your life. What has been going down?
Well, these days it's mostly momming. And then I also work as a service coordinator through the Autism Society here in North Carolina. So when I'm not wrangling, my own little guy who also happens to be on the autism spectrum, I'm helping other families and individuals navigate their services and interventions and things like that because I found this niche in college and have kind of just run with it. It's led to the rest of my life. So it did start in college. I was working part time. I've always loved working with children, always enjoyed, babysitting, that kind of thing. And I was doing the whole daycare circuit at that point. And it was exhausting. And I was staying sick, right, with the little kids and the snotty noses. And, so I was like, I've got to find something different. I've got to figure out a way to do something else that I enjoy, but not this. And I was scanning the part-time job ads. And at this point, most of my experience had been with children who weren't necessarily neurodivergent, or if they were, they hadn't had a diagnosis yet. And so there was and this is aging me a little bit, but an ad for, it was called a CAP worker at that time, which is essentially what the innovations waiver is now, which if you're not in Medicaid and services, that probably sounds like a different language. But anyway, at that time, essentially it was working part-time with children who had some need either in the community or in the home. And it was the highest paying part-time job. And I was like, I love kids. Why not? I'll try. So I jumped in and just fell in love with the work. It was very fulfilling. I felt like I had a purpose, and it was something I felt like I was pretty okay at. So that I started with one provider agency and wanted to pick up more hours. So I started working with a different provider agency. There were times when I had like 4 or 5 clients at one time. I would skip college classes to work. I loved it. It was my preference, and who doesn't want that instant gratification of a paycheck versus waiting to the end of the semester to see a number on a piece of paper. So I did that. And then that led into teaching special education. And then at that point, I was living with my parents in my hometown. It was my first year teaching. I was lateral entry. It was in what a lot of people refer to as a self-contained classroom. Here in Pitt County, we call it, ECS, exceptional or extended content standards. And those are for your kind of certificate route students versus your actual diploma route. So it's our higher support friends. It was my first year teaching. I was living back home and I was teaching that classroom, a 3rd through 5th grade multi-category classroom. I decided to go on vacation to the Dominican Republic for spring break and fell in love with the people and the culture, and moved in August to teach there. Now, mind you, where I'm from, the hometown. No one knew what I was doing or why. Everyone's like, oh, are you going on a mission trip? And I was like, no, I'm just going to move there and teach. But you have a family there you're going to go live with? Nope, I'm going by myself. And they're like, oh, but you're going to be doing like Bible school, right? Nope. Mm-mm. Like people just couldn't wrap their mind around it. But I wanted something different. And I knew that I hate to say made for something different because that sounds so cliche and like cheesy, right? But I knew there was something other than what was going on that I was meant for, or that I was supposed to be doing. So I was in the Dominican Republic for 6 years, which were amazing. And if I had a bank account with infinite zeros to bring me back and forth whenever I wanted or needed, I'd still be there. So I did that for 6 years, came back, continued to work like early intervention, then went back into teaching special education. And I bought my house, right? So I'm doing all the big girl things, right? I have a job, I have this career, I have, my salary, I've got insurance, I've got life insurance. Now I've bought my house. Haven't quite suckered a man into marrying me yet, but I'm doing all the other things, right? And something just wasn't settled in my soul. Like something just in the innermost part of me, something was missing, something wasn't right. There was something that needed to change or be different. So I was just unsettled. And I wasn't really sure what it was. And one evening I was scrolling, as we all do, and it was a little girl. Her name was Worthy, and it was her Instagram reel. And she is a young lady who was adopted from China, who also happens to have Down syndrome or trisomy 21, like my son does. And oh my gosh, I'm getting choked up already. I'm so sorry. This is gonna be this is gonna be tough for you. I am so sorry. And I just thought I could do that, right? Like I could do that. And then, of course, the first person I texted was my really good friend Emily, who had adopted from China a few years before. And I was like, no one's going to give me a kid, right? Like, no one's going to let me adopt a child, especially a child from a different country and a child with special needs. Like, no one's going to think that's a good idea but me. And of course, having been through the process, she's like, absolutely not. They will give you a child in a heartbeat. Fill it out, the paperwork, do your thing. You should totally pursue it. And so I think it was that same evening I went on Google and just looked up special needs adoptions because, again, it's what I'm good at, right? It's my niche. It's what I enjoy. And I came across Reese's Rainbow, and that's where I saw, I'm getting choked up. That's where I saw my son's profile for the first time ever. Now, I will tell you, I did not look at him and go, that's my child. That's not the way that worked. But I also knew going into it that, like, you have to be a certain amount of money and a certain, paperwork into the process. Like, you have to have certain amounts of paperwork, and, to get these things done, you have to have paid this amount of money before you can be officially matched. So I knew I kind of like intrinsically guarded myself. I may look at this child and think, oh, there's my youngin, but there's a good chance that that might really not be my youngin because I still have to get a ways down the line. So like I said, I kind of guarded myself, but I knew looking at his video I was listening to, and I still have it, the video that the first video I saw of him, but there was a lady speaking to him in Spanish, and she was just telling him, like, here, take this, sit up, but it was super simple, like, and I thought, I can say those things, like all the directions she just gave him, I can do all of that. And then when I read the profile, it talked about him liking the pull toys, like the toys that are attached to a string, and I was like, I can buy it. Like, I can afford a pool toy. So I can get him one of them little dogs on a string, and I can speak to him in simple Spanish. I could be his mom. And from there, over the next 18 months, things just kind of fell into place. Now, I say that big picture because big picture, yes, things fell into place. I can't remember if I'd already signed a contract with the adoption agency or not yet, but essentially you have to choose what program you're going to go with, and that's what country. Each country has different rules for who they will and won't let adopt, and if they will or won't let you adopt certain ages or like a child with special needs. So I was 35 at the time. At 35, I would not have been able to adopt my son if he hadn't have had special needs because of the fact that he was under 5 when we started. And so I was considered too old. I wouldn't have been able, but because he had special needs, he was open to single moms, older parents, and each country has their own rules as far as that's concerned. So of course I'm looking at the different countries and their programs and the cost. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at international adoption, but you can buy a pretty nice car for the amount of money that it costs to adopt internationally. And so it got down to, I was looking at China at the time because of the cost of $10,000 cheaper, or Colombia, which is where Nico was. But I knew I could speak Spanish. As far as, most children who do have the kind of need that I was interested in adopting a child with are going to need some help with communication. And the only language that I'd be able to even support with would be Spanish. And I'm not even fluent in Spanish. So I kind of leaned towards Colombia because the Dominican Republic, where I had lived and wanted to adopt from, you had to be married for 5 years. And so I was not able to adopt from there. And it just got to a point where I said, you know what? If I can come up with 30 grand for an adoption, I can come up with 40. What's an extra 10? So, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. If it's supposed to happen, it's supposed to happen. And so I said, all right, I'm going to go with Colombia. Now, mind you, that's not true. Anyone except for Emily, who was super close to me, was like, I'm sorry, you're going to do what? Like, you think I told them I was going to, I don't know, drill my head in half and walk around with my brain exposed. Like, your plan is, huh? Like, I'm going to adopt a child from Colombia with special needs. And they're like, why? How? They're like, oh, and it costs how much? I don't know. I don't know how it's going to happen, but this is my goal and this is my plan. And somehow, some way, it's going to work out, and it's going to happen in the timeline it's going to happen in. Would I love to have a child here tomorrow? Sure. But maybe that's not the way it's going to work. And so, of course, this whole time, and his name was Neil. Nico is his real name, but online on his profile, they can't have their real names. So at that point, I only knew him as Neil. That profile is always in the back of my head, right? This little guy. And so when I signed on with the agency that I was working with, I let them know he was who I was interested in. I'm going to go with Columbia. And so you start doing all the paperwork and the fingerprints and, the verification of your paychecks and your taxes and, all the things. And if there were bumps along the road, and like I said, I say everything fell into place, but my parents were not supportive at all. And as a mom now, I can see that. How scary is that? First of all, I was like, hey, I'm going to move to the Dominican Republic. Bye. And then I come home and I'm like, hey, I'm a single female living by myself 2 hours away from you all. And I'm going to adopt a child from another country who has some pretty significant need. And I'm just going to make it happen by myself. So jump on board. Like, I get it. I do from their perspective, but they were like, absolutely not. And I kept telling my dad, I was like, I feel like this is my calling. I feel like this is my purpose. And I'll never forget, my dad told me in these exact words, well, the Lord hadn't told me that that's your purpose yet, and he's going to have to talk to me before I get on board. And I was like, but this is my purpose. I'm supposed to do this. I mean, there were arguments. I'm being totally honest, transparent. There was fighting because it felt so right for me, but it was so scary for them. And again, where I'm from, this isn't something you see every day. This isn't typical. So of course, like I said, it caused a lot of anxiety with my parents. I applied for a grant to help with some of the funding and received, and that was approved, or I was given that. I received that. So that kind of helped me move through, like, to the next step, because it was a larger sum, to the next step in the adoption process. And at this point, I'm still not officially matched with my son, right? He's who I'm pursuing. He's who I'd like to have, but I'm not at a point where I can say, yes, this is, or where the authorities, the powers that be, will say, yes, he's going to be yours. So I'm still kind of keeping my the guard up. And I will never forget, I had just gotten the second round of, like, the first round of COVID vaccines where you had to go back 3 months later. I had just gotten the second one on Friday, and it was that Saturday. And I was laying around the house, and my whole body's achy. I've got a fever. I feel like garbage. And at this point in the process, I've already joined all the groups, right? All the Facebook groups of adopting and all this. And a lady comes on and is like, or posts that her and her husband were reviewing the file of a little boy, and essentially described Neil at that time. She's like, but my husband's not sure about the extra need. I don't know. What do you all think? Blah, blah, blah. And so I reached out and I private messaged her and I was like, hey, is Neil, the child that you're discussing? And she was like, yeah, I don't know. My husband, we already have a child and he's unsure and blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, I called my mom crying and I'm like, someone's trying to take my child. And of course she's like, what are you talking about? What's going on? And it broke my heart. And because my mom and dad at that point were not on board, mom was not very comforting, though not intentionally, but not very comforting. And she's like, well, if it's meant to be, it's going to work out, Whitney. You've just got to trust. And who wants to hear that, right? I'm super sad. Tell me no. Tell me no, that's your child. He needs to be yours. Tell me what I want to hear. Don't be reasonable. But, it took a lot of thought and prayer and more strength than, I'm starting to get choked up, get more strength than I ever knew I'd have. And I decided that weekend that, and I messaged the other lady and told her this, that if their family was what was best for him, that's what I wanted for him, right? Like, if this is where he's supposed to be and you all can provide things for him that I can't, then that's what I want for him. And I wasn't happy with it, but I kind of, like, made peace with it. I was still in the adoption process. There's tons of kids who need a home, right? And that was over the weekend. And then I had emailed my case manager through the adoption agency and had told her, I saw on the website, this lady's looking at Neil's profile, blah, blah, blah. If there's another family who's a better fit, I don't want to stand in the way. You know, this kind of thing. And she emailed me back and was like, I don't know who this family is. I don't know where they would have seen the profile. But what I can tell you is that Columbia recently changed their rules, and you can submit what's called a letter of intent. So you send them a letter telling them, what child you want to be matched with, why you think you would be a good match. And then you have to send a video of like a house tour, a tour of your home and a video, and you can send it to them, and they will hold the file for you for 8 months. They'll hold the file. No one else can try to match. They'll hold the file for 8 months if they look through your paperwork and they agree. That was on Monday. I think probably by Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning, I had sent all of that in. Because to me, it was just a sign, right? Like, I come to terms with the fact that if somebody else was better for him and what he needed, I was okay with it. And then this door flies open, and I'm running through it. So I did, and of course they agreed. And so they were holding his file for me for 8 months. So it was going to go through, that was in March. They would hold him through the end of November. And this timeline is important because of the next piece that's coming up. So fast forward, going through the summer, living life, doing things. And of course, adoption is still on my radar and it's a big deal, but you can only do but so much. It's a hurry up and wait game. And then it got to where to move to the next step in the process, I had to come up with like $8,000. I think it was, to be able to move to the next step, which would then allow them to continue to hold him after that 8 month gap. It was like I think $8,000 fee or something. And I thought, well, where am I going to come up with that? Right? Like, where's that going to come from? And uh, a girl that I went to high school with, Lindsay, she is now Lindsay Fisher. She was Lindsay Saw at the time, or Lindsay Saw at high school. We went to high school together, and she worked with a real estate company in Northern Virginia. And she said, hey, my boss is trying to live, or wants to get to a point where she can live the 90-10 lifestyle, where she lives off of 10% of her income and essentially, uses the other 90 to support other people, to give back, whatever. So, in an effort to kind of push that, the real estate company sponsors someone every month, and they'd like to sponsor you in your journey for a month. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And so their IT guy did an interview with me, kind of like this, and he put together this super cool video, and they sent it out, and they sponsored me for a month. And I had no idea. I knew it was happening, but I didn't, there wasn't a website where you could, like the telethons, right, where you watch the money go up on the thermometer. Like, that wasn't happening. And I knew they were fundraising, and I was happy as I could be that they were doing what they were doing. And she asked, hey, can you come to our staff meeting in November, and we'll present you with the check? And I was, absolutely. So, mom, dad, and I all went to Northern Virginia to go into their staff meeting to get this check. And again, it's mid-November, and they will hold Nico's file through the end of November. And we go into the meeting, and there's all these people in the building, and then they also have me on virtual. So I have no idea how many people are watching, and I'm so nervous. And they, talk about what they're doing. They raise money, and the lady's like, I'm so proud of our staff, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, it's probably going to be like, I don't know, $7,000 or $10,000, which is amazing. So excited. They turned that check around, and it was $27,000. I ugly face cry. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's because, people who had bought houses through them, people who had sold houses through them, their staff, they would agree to give up certain percentages of their like closing fees and things like that. So they came up with almost my entire adoption fee, because it was 40 total, and they came up with 27. It was absolutely amazing. At this point, my dad gets on board. Because at this point, he's received the message, right? Now he's still nervous. He does not necessarily doesn't get out his pom poms, like he's not cheering me on. But he received the message. He got it. So that was in November, and I kept pushing through the process, filling out the paperwork, sending the pictures and the videos, and doing all the things. And then I think it was June the following year, I was officially matched to Nico, to my little Neil. I received the official match paperwork, and then they called me probably before the end of June, and this is 2022, and they said, you'll be going in August. You'll be going in late August to pick him up. which was what it was so not real. It like thinking back now on what it felt like when I was there and what it felt like when they told me, so different. I remember being excited, but it wasn't real yet. And so Emily agreed to go with me for the first week because she said, "Look, I know how hard it is. You and this new child are learning each other and learning the ropes, and you're in a foreign country. You know, I feel like I can support you and I want to." She's like, "I've been there. I feel like I understand kind of the need," which was great because reflecting, I feel like a lot of people would have wanted to be more helpful, but that time's really important that you're doing all of the care for the child so that they learn you're their new person. So it worked out really well. But we left here on the 23rd of August. And so I was missing the beginning of the school year. I was still teaching at the time. Left the 23rd. We arrived in Columbia on the 24th. I met the team that had been working with Nico, so like his physical therapist, speech therapist, that whole crew. I met with them on the 25th. The nutritionist had a baby doll with a G tube that had been like the button stuck in its stomach. And I practiced twice on plugging it in and giving it food. And then on the 26th, that morning, I met him. I was at the office and he was put in my arms and he's been with me every day since. I feel a lot about it like I did when I went to the Dominican Republic. Like upon reflection, I see all the gaps, all the things I wasn't prepared for, all the things I didn't know, all the things that I should have been nervous about, all the things that should have made me change my mind. Right? Like, oh, you can't do this because you don't know how to blah blah blah. But none of that was at the forefront of my brain during the process. And a lot of people have negative adjectives to use for that, right? Like, oh, you're so impulsive, or oh, you don't really think things through or whatever. I think that it's a mindset as far as I'm not going to focus on the things that are going to make this harder why I can't. I know this is there. I know this is something I need to learn or be better at, but that's not going to be at the forefront. The forefront is going to be, I'm getting ready to be the mom of this amazing this amazing little boy. And my whole world, his whole world's going to change. My whole world's going to change. Like, it's just going to be this great adventure. But like I said, upon reflection, I'm like, dude, you practiced a G2 on a baby doll twice, and then you were responsible for keeping a child alive in a foreign country. Who thought this was a good idea? Like, who agreed to this? The first week was such a blur, like looking back on it now, because it was, all these ranges of emotions. I'm so excited I've got him. I'm not prepared. I don't know what to do. What's he thinking? So you follow, a lot of my social media, so you know a little bit about my little dinosaur. But Nico is completely G-tube dependent. He has been since he was 3 months old. He is, so the term that I like to use and that I've heard used and I feel like is kind of most appropriate is non-speaking, because when people say nonverbal, a lot of people assume that he just makes no noises or sounds, and that is not accurate at all. And that's why I call him a dinosaur, because he can growl and fuss like you would not believe. He just doesn't have actual words, but that doesn't stop him. He still bosses everyone around, but we'll get to that later. So, Nico is non-speaking. When he first came home, he had absolutely no means of communication. And he really didn't even cry much. Like when you think of a baby, when they're hungry, when they want something, when they're tired, they cry. But Nico, I can't say for certain, but my assumption would be he learned that that didn't necessarily get his need met. And so he didn't do it. So the only time I really remember him crying, and I'm sure it happened more, actually, there were two instances. One was in the middle of the night. He'd cry randomly in the middle of the night, and I'm going to cry talking about this. I'm sorry. And it happened a lot during probably the first month, where he'd just wake up and cry, but he didn't want me to touch him. So I'd play La Vaca Lola on YouTube because that was his favorite. And I learned that from his foster mom in the videos and things. And I'd just play that until he'd go back to sleep, or he wouldn't go back to sleep and we'd just get up. But that's when he'd cry. And then I had to sit him on a stool for a passport photo. And I remember he cried for that too. And it tore my heart into pieces because I had to let him sit there and stay to get a photo. But all I wanted to do was pick him up. But anyway, I say all that to say he had no consistent means of communication. And what he would generally do is he would ball up his fist and hit himself in like his front teeth, or he'd turn his hand palm up and like dig his fingernails into his forehead. So that's what he would do when upset. He had little red dots, like little red scabs on his forehead when he came home. He couldn't walk at the time. He was 5 years old, 20 pounds, couldn't walk. He'd scoot around on the floor. um he'd pull himself up a little bit, but he'd like pull himself up and crawl onto something. He didn't have the stamina to like stand. He does have Down syndrome. Since being home, he has been diagnosed with autism. At the time, he did not have the autism diagnosis. But I say all that to say, learning all of these things along with him the first week, it was amazing and stressful and wild. And like I said, it's all a blur now. But Emily was probably the best support I could have ever asked for in that moment, because I kept thinking, well, I'm in a foreign country. I'm supposed to be going and seeing all the things of Colombia, because, that's what in your agency even offers, that if you want to go on a tour, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm wasting this valuable opportunity. But all my brain could think was, I just want to sit in this room with him and learn him. I just want to, we can venture out to, a restaurant or whatever close by, but I just want to learn him. And I want us to be able to exit if it is a situation that is stressful on either one of us. And I want to be able to comfort him and soothe and everybody be happy. And I want him to learn that I'm his person. Because at this point, Nico is 8, but cognitively, he's probably a 1 or 2 year old. So at 5, he is significantly malnourished at 20 pounds. He was on, it's called Tegretol, which is for seizures or neurological diseases. Because they wanted to keep him calm. There was just so much at the time that was going on, and it was hard to know what he understood. And I still say to this day that as far as he's concerned, I kind of came in and kidnapped him. He had been with the same family since about 6 months old, which is a good thing, but was told, by the agency that I worked with and the representatives I worked with there in the country, that in Colombia, here in the States, a lot of times you hear stories about people who foster and they foster to adopt, but that's not really a thing there. Fostering is a job. It's not to say that anyone, abuses the children, which that happens everywhere. But, it's not to say that Colombia as a whole is cold, or they don't love the children that are in the foster system. It's just that it is a job. It's not necessarily seen as, well, I just want, to love a little bit somebody extra. That's not the family that he was with, had 5 to 7 children most of the time. And like I said, he was with them from 6 months until a little over 5 and 1 month. So he was with them for a while, long enough to know that those were his people, right? This is his house. These are his things. As part of the adoption process, I had to send a book with pictures. And so they took a lot of those and blew it up and like put it on a balloon and put it on a ball, so he kind of got used to my face. I think we had 2 or 3 video chats, which he was essentially laying on the floor. I did more conversing with his team. But like I said, to him, I kind of came in and kidnapped him. So in the back of my mind, how can I lessen his stress? How can I make this easier on him so that he understands he's with someone who loves him versus just waiting to get back to the woman that was his mom. So that's why it was so important that Emily was with me during that time, because she understood that. She knew how important it was for me to bond with him and for him to feel safe and secure, right? I don't want to say indebted, because I'm not, because she did it because she wanted to, but I will forever and ever, ever be so grateful that she was there that first week. The next week we went to, so that was like the mountains and it was cold. And then the next week we were at like more Caribbean side of the country where the paperwork was done and he was officially mine. He became a Jones. And my parents were there for that part of the week. And so that's where they met their grandson for the first time. And he's not mine anymore. He's theirs. They immediately fell in love. And also while we were there, we met other families who were doing the same thing. One family had another little guy who was about the same age as Nico, but significantly more independent, and sliced his ankle open day 1 in the pool. There was another family who she was adopting 3 girls, or her and her husband were adopting 3 girls, a set of 3 sisters that they had hosted during one of the summer hosting programs. And it was the day that they were supposed to go in front of, like, go to the consulate and fill out all the paperwork and do all the things to like get the passport so they could come back. And she refused to get out of bed. She's like, nope, I'm not going anywhere. I don't want to do anything. And I think, though, it's one of those sorry it's you, but glad it's not me moments, right? Like, and not to sound selfish, But I think that those struggles helped my parents to see Nico has his own difficulties, but that doesn't mean that if he didn't, it would be easy. Like it's not to say that it would be any easier if he were another child, because look at these children who don't have the same things and look at what, their families are also struggling. We found one of those, the things that you can put on your back or on your front and you put the baby in it. Well, he was 20 pounds, so he was a baby. So we found one of those things and I'd strap him on the front or the back of me and we'd go walk down to a restaurant or go do, he was easygoing. And even to this day, he likes to move. So put him in a stroller and push him, driving in the car, on the back of a bike. My Lord, you got to fight him to get him off the back of a bike. He likes to be moving. He likes to watch what's going on around him. So when, I throw him on my back and we go out and do things, it worked out well. We stayed close because of the G tube and the feeds and all. At that point, I was feeding him every 2 hours and there wasn't a pump. So you plug him in and you hold this giant cup and just wait for the food gravity to push it through. Yeah, it was fun. Meanwhile, you're doing this in a hotel room, right? So you've got like the hotel room sink. That's why I say, upon reflection, it's like, what did you do? Like, what were you thinking? But if I had gone into it with all that in the forefront of my mind, I wouldn't be where I am today. And this is where I'm supposed to be. So we came home September 21st and October 17th was our first day back at school. I was teaching and he went to a gen ed kindergarten classroom because he didn't have an IEP yet. So he couldn't be in a separate setting. And he was in a regular stroller because at that point, he hadn't even really been added to my insurance. So he had nothing. They didn't have time to get an adaptive stroller or anything like that. So he went to the kindergarten classroom in a regular stroller and he couldn't have been put with a better fit that year as far as the teacher and the TA. The teacher, I can't remember how many grandchildren she said she has, but she had, a bunch of grandchildren and kids. And so she just threw them in her lap like one of her grandbabies when she was doing circle time and things like that. Like, and the TA would push him up and down the hallway in the stroller, like they just, instead of looking at it as, oh my gosh, how inconvenient it is that we essentially have this baby in a classroom full of kindergartners in October, right? So first time these children have been to school, they hadn't been there that long. It's still kind of wild. The kids are still coming in crying every morning wanting to go home. And then here I come with Nico, but they were amazing. And that's more or less been our experience since he's been home. It's so funny because I talk all the time about how he's a stubborn cuss. So he's a stubborn little thing, my gosh, and he's got an attitude, blah blah. But at the end of the day, really and truly, he kind of brings love wherever he goes. And I'm not saying he's like a giggle ball sunshine all the time. I'm not. But there's something about him, and maybe it's the story, maybe it's the journey. I don't know. But everywhere he goes, everybody loves him, even when he's not very nice. Everybody loves him. And we've been very, very, very blessed that he, therapists and resources and even with my background working with children very similar to him, there were so many things medically. The behavioral side I knew more about, but the medical side I didn't know as much of. So there's just so much that I didn't know. He has been, or he is eligible for what's called the CAPC waiver, which is the Community Alternative Programs for Children, which essentially says that he has so much medical need that without this extra assistance, he would probably have to be in like an institutional setting to take care of his needs. And so that has helped as far as paying for therapies. And he has one-on-one staff that come in and work with him either in the morning or in the afternoons and that kind of thing. And that's been a real game changer for us. Was in public school the first year. He was in the same school as I was, just a few classrooms down. I said that year that the only reason I didn't really care, Mickey Mouse could have been teaching that classroom, and I wanted him in there because I thought it was important for us as a unit, as a family, that he see me during the day. Right. We'd only been home 3 weeks and he's already going to be spending 40 hours a week in other people's care. I want him to see me throughout the day. So I held my ground on that. Because there was another classroom in the county that would have been a better fit as far as progress, seeing him, do things, but he's not going to be able to progress and grow and do the things he needs without knowing that he's safe, without knowing that he's loved, without knowing that he has a person. He's in a completely new country And he's, we're all Charlie Brown teachers around him, right? He's like, what the heck is this noise? So I thought that was really important that he have that one consistent person. So the first year he was at the same school as I was, which was great. I loved being able, he went with me in the morning. He came with me home with me in the evenings. I loved having him there. He hung out at staff meetings. So he had, 37 other moms in the building. It was amazing. And then I decided that I couldn't teach and be mom because I was either choosing to prepare what needed to be prepared for the next day for my student success or be a mom in the evenings. And Nico won. He always won. This is my famous line. I spent 18 months and $40,000 so that I could be his mother, so that I could raise him, not so that, I could have him at a daycare or, leave him with other people. And you have to do what you have to do, right? But I didn't do all that to chase a career. I did all that to be a mom and a family, and this is now my focus. So part of our amazing team, Courtney is here, and she's supposed to leave at 6. Bye, thank you. And so I transitioned from my bedroom out to the living room, hoping that she would leave, be like, okay, bye, see ya. And so I was like, hold on, so I could tell her, get out of my house. You're not getting paid anymore. Oh Lord, leave. But she was like, I didn't want to. But we do. We just have the best team. We have everyone loves him. Everyone loves to see him grow and progress. And most of the time they're just entertained by his shenanigans anyway, his growling and his fussing and his things. But anyway, we have an amazing team. We've been very, very blessed to have some great, great, great folk. I left teaching. That's where I was going. So after a year, an opportunity to work for a local MCO, local management, MCO, managed care organization. Sorry, I have to think about what the acronyms stand for, and work from home. And so that's why I took that position, because I would be able to work from home. I was still working with the population, because at that point I was working to build the workforce development plan for children with complex needs. So essentially, how do we help build up and prepare providers and their agencies to better support children who are dually diagnosed with both mental health and intellectual developmental disabilities? But that one was going to allow me to work from home. I took that job, and Nico was placed at the school closest to here, which I knew the principal, so I was good with that. And so it was one Saturday in August before he started. They were doing like cleanup campus day. And I was like, okay, we're going to go out. He'll get to see the building, familiar, so it won't be the first day of school. It won't be, new. And hopefully he'll get to meet his teacher or TAs or somebody. So I took him out there, and sure enough, one of the TAs was out there. I thought it was her daughter, but come to find out it was her little sister. And she is just going in on her little sister in Spanish. Like, everybody's picking up sticks and cleaning up the flower beds, and she's like, like just going in. And I was like, so you're a native Spanish speaker, huh? And she was like, yeah, my family's from Mexico. And I was like, dude, he loves Spanish. It's really comforting for him, because that's all he heard the first 5 years of his life. So she starts speaking to him in Spanish that day while I'm out there. And they bonded instantly. Like, he loved her very quickly. And so that kind of escalated from her being one of the assistants in his classroom to me going, hey, we've got this service where he has people who work with him after school. Do you by chance need an after school job? Because she was always the one who would come get him from me in the mornings or bring him to me in the afternoons. And the Spanish really was super comforting to him. He goes to a Dominican barber shop because he goes in and all the fellas speak to him in Spanish. He walks in. Mr. Jose's the guy who cuts his hair. He walks in. He goes to Mr. Jose's chair. If someone else is in Mr. Jose's chair, he walks over and he like grabs the chair and looks at him like, what are you doing in Mr. Jose's chair? If Mr. Jose's not there, it doesn't matter. He goes and he gets in Mr. Jose's chair, and he sits there and he's like, okay, it's time for my haircut. He loves it. And he does not want to leave when it's time to go. I have to make him very angry when it's time to leave. But I do think that native Spanish is very, very comforting for him to hear. So her name is Maria. Him and Maria bonded almost instantly. And so I brought her onto the team for after school. And I think there was a Saturday event. I can't even remember what it was now. But I was like, hey, do you want to work on Saturday so that we can go to, I think it was like at one of the local libraries, they were having like some kids event or something. And I was like, do you want to work on Saturday and come with us? And then if you want to bring your little sister, she can come too because it's an event for kids. And I think that he'll probably do better having a model, like a peer to kind of follow and watch. And from that day on, him and her little sister were besties. Her little sister's about a year younger than he is, but she treated him like any other child. She'd take a toy from him and run, and he'd waddle behind her. And I love that. What he didn't start walking until he was 6. And even to this day at 8, he does not have a very steady gait at all. But he does not let that stop him. But so sometimes he's a little uneasy, a little unsteady, and he just grabs whatever's closest to him. And I'll never forget, it was a library kids event because he was kind of unsteady and he grabbed the child closest to him, and it scared the child, rightfully so. He's hanging out with us now, but it scared the other child. And then the mom kind of moved the other, like, come on, honey, we'll just come play over here. Now, as a mother, I get it. I would have done the same. What are you supposed to do? The child was too little to understand. He has an intellectual disability. He doesn't realize he was just hurting you. So you can't really have that conversation with the other child. But at the same time, he was scaring that little boy. So the mom wanted to move him away where he would be comfortable. I get it. I do. I didn't like it. There were lots of parts of me as a mom who were like, don't move your child away from my child. But like I said, I get it. But Kaylani, who is Maria's little sister and Nico's best friend, he can grab onto her shirt or her, I don't know, skin. Doesn't matter. He can grab whatever he needs to if he's unsteady. And she's like, what are you doing? Like, she is unfazed. She treats him like any other child. And because of that, he follows her lead. They went to the Marbles Museum a couple months ago together. And he did more that day with her than he ever did when I took him because he had a peer to watch. And he is at a point in his progression where developmentally he's able to kind of watch and engage in his environment a little bit more. So at this point, Maria and her sister are just parts of the family. Maria's still with us. He goes to ABA now because after that year of school, he had also received his autism diagnosis, and that made him eligible for ABA therapy, applied behavior analysis. And he's at a point even now where telling him come here and sit down, he doesn't necessarily follow that direction. Sometimes he'll do come here if he wants to. Sometimes he'll sit down if he wants to. But he hasn't really always understood that. Even in Spanish, he didn't necessarily understand it. I don't know, and I said this for a long time when he first came home, I don't know how much language he really understood when he came home. I think that he learned things by gestures and routine. So, for example, now if I say, let's go wash your butt, because that's what I say, he knows I'm talking about getting in the bathtub. That's because it's the same thing I've said for almost 3 years now. But initially, when I'd say it and stick my hand out and we'd walk to the bathroom, he didn't understand the language piece. He understood it's the end of the day. It's this point in the day, staff left. This is what we do now. So this is where I go. It wasn't the language. So I said that even when he first came home, I don't even know how much Spanish he understood. Like, I don't know how much language he understood. He picked up a lot of things, and a lot of our friends with intellectual disabilities learn to cope that way, right? My receptive language skills are very low. I don't understand what you're asking of me. I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm going to look for all these context clues to give you what I want, give you what you want, because it makes life easier. So, and I still don't know exactly what all language he understands, but there are certain things I know he knows. But Spanish has always been super comforting, even though, like I said, I don't know. I think because it's just what he's always heard. He still watches. I got a video of him, and this was the first time I ever suspected that he might be on the spectrum. There was a video of him. He was in the room with his foster father, and they were playing. It's called La Granja de Zenon, which is Zenon's farm. And playing this song, and he was kind of like rocking back and forth like this to it, dancing. And so of course I Shazammed it and figured out what it was, and then found it on YouTube once he was home. And he still watches it to this day. He still watches that same stuff on YouTube. Like, he loves it. It's in Spanish, but it's his favorite. So I think there's a lot of those things that are still super comforting to him. Our typical day, gosh, so we actually, and this is, well, and you can cut and use as much as you want of this and not use as much as you want, because Lord knows I'm a talker. When he was 3 months old, his biological mother took him to the hospital because he was aspirating when she was trying to feed him. And the hospital and, the folks there, the signs of neglect were so apparent that they immediately took custody away. And they placed a G tube so that he could be fed. And mom never made any effort to come out to the hospital to see him, to regain custody. I think that they called her one time and she came out the one time they called, but she never did any of the things that had to be done to be able to get him back, and really showed no interest. When they called the bio father, the man who was listed on the birth certificate, though they were living together at the time, he says, mom cheated, he's not my son. There were two older brothers who had were grown and moved out of the house. One of them said he had a child who had a cleft lip, and he said, we have our own struggle. I can't take that on as well. Fair. And then the other brother said, he's not my dad's son. He's not my brother. I don't want him. And I say all that to say, at 3 months old, poor little guy was in the hospital. And as much as it breaks my heart to say, nobody wanted him, right? But now here he is. He just turned 8 July 1st. He's everyone's favorite person. I have to share him more than I really want to, if I'm being honest. And we just came back from vacationing in the Dominican Republic, which my parents made possible. We're not big ballers. That's not it. But just the fact that this little guy, in Colombia, South America, at 3 months, couldn't eat, barely making it. Nobody wanted him. And now he's going and, swimming in the ocean and, licking the pool bar, like just having the best time of his life, opportunities and doing things and growing that no one ever expected. This wasn't the life that the world thought he should have. As much as I love that I get to be a part of it, I just love it for him. I love that he gets to experience these things. He gets to grow in these ways, right? He was watching other kids in the pool, and he started sticking his head under because he was watching them previously trying to put him in water that was above his knees. He'd hold on to you like trying to put a cat in a bathtub. He's like, no, don't do it. But we got to the point where he'd plop himself right, and he had on his life jacket, of course, but he'd plop himself over right in the pool, and he'd stick his head under and then come up. I didn't know that he'd ever be at a point where he would watch other children and then try things like that. Like, I didn't know if we'd ever get there, especially when he first came home. So to see it now, it's just amazing. I don't know. There's no words. It's the best feeling in the world. And it makes all the 3 a.m. parties, all the other things, all the hair that's been pulled out, makes all of that worth it.
Oh my gosh, I could ask you 100 questions because there were so many things that you kind of opened the box a little bit on that I wanted to be like, how did you push through in that moment? But I think the thing I'm most curious, I think that most listeners, you're a single mom, you're in your prime. What is your day like? And you mentioned a lot about your team. Kind of like tell us about like a let's say a school day.
Mm-hmm.
What a school day is like for him with your team. And then I want to hear like about your life. Like, what do you do for Whitney?
So our day generally starts out with get up and we do a morning. He now has a feeding pump, which makes life a lot easier. But he does have special formula. He's still G-tube dependent. We're working on feeding, but 5 years of not using your mouth for anything functional is really hard to undo. So it wakes up, he does a morning feed. That's usually about 45 minutes. And I have to make the mixture of either Pedialyte or water, formula, and meds, right? So usually I get him going with his morning feed, and then I'll start making the ones that are going to be used later in the day to send to school with him, like for his teen. So I'll work on doing just like any other kid. I'm packing his lunch. It's just not a peanut butter and jelly. So I'll start doing that. I'll start getting ready. And then usually about 8 o'clock, sometimes a little bit after, it depends on the day. He's got therapy. So either speech, PT, or OT. He has each of those twice a week. And one of them is at the house and one of them is at the clinic, because we want him to generalize skills. So we don't want him to only do it at the clinic or only do it at home. So we do one at each. So either he has to be at therapy or they have to be here. By that time he has to be ready to roll. So usually from 8 to 9, 8:30, 9:30-ish, that's when he has therapy of some sort. And I'm at work by 9, or at least I try to be. They're flexible. Thank the Lord. I've found the Autism Society, they've been amazing since I've started with them. So I try to go to work at 9, and at this point one of his staff have come in, and so they finish out therapy with him, and then we'll take him to ABA once therapy's done. And sometimes they hang out with him for a little while. And so they have their own goals that they work on here at the house as far as communication and life skills, things like that. But for him, he is full support. He everything, dressing, eating, any grooming, any of that. Brushing his teeth is still like wrestling a wild bear. Um so he requires support to have everything done. So everything's a learning opportunity, right? You want this, so you have to show me the card for it, or you have to, pinch this button to make this happen, because we're working on those fine motor skills that will then lead to some of the grooming abilities and things. So everything's an opportunity to grow and progress with him, everything. And it's just about teaching folks where to look and how to kind of make it work, make it be a learning opportunity. So that's what they do with him after therapy until he goes to ABA. Depending on the morning, he's at ABA 9:30, 10 o'clock. A little bit later, he's there for 6 hours. And that's what I decided after his second year in the public school, because of his intellectual disability and the G-tube, the medical need. The classroom that he was generally kind of looped into based on those needs was the ID severe classrooms, intellectual disability severe. But he is more mobile than most of the children, especially the ones that were in his classroom when he was in the ID severe classroom. And a lot of those children have higher medical need. So they require not only lifting and moving, but sometimes being put in a stander or repositioned during the day, or, trachs that, or a child that's 3 times the size of Nico but has to be lifted and carried to a changing table, diaper changed, spoon fed, during lunch, or what, just higher medical need, higher one, like hands-on need. And as much as the classroom staff were doing as much as they could to kind of see him grow and progress, there was a lot of the day where he was being babysat. And they were doing what they could with what they had. I love all of the ladies that he had that year. But at ABA, he has a one-on-one who addresses goals that are developed based on his needs. I love being a mom.
And because this is audio only, they don't see that was such a normal, like, child thing that he just threw it. Was that like a squid? What was that he just threw at your head?
It's a little diver, and it hit me in the head.
That's so normal. Like, I love that you were able to bring him to a place where he feels loved and safe enough to do such a, I hate to say normal because we're told not to use those terms,
I know.
it was just so na
Hmm.
it was heartwarming to me to see him do something so natural.
I say all the time, he just blah 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 like any other kid, and so I do the same thing. I find it heartwarming too. I love it when he gets to be like anyone else. And I struggle with talking about this side of it sometimes because I don't want it to be woe is me. I don't want it to be, oh, my poor child, my poor baby. Like, I don't want it to sound like that. But our society is not created for individuals like him, right? He has to learn to fit into the society and this world that is essentially catered to everyone, to other people, to not to people like him. And so the opportunities for him to do things that other children his age, or even that look, and he looks like a 4 or 5 year old. So even 4 or 5 year old would go and do and enjoy. The chances of him to go and do and actually enjoy it are so slim, because yes, it could be a super fun event that most children love, but it's way too overstimulating for him. Or, he has to wait in lines and he doesn't understand that. And so he hurts himself, or, things like that. But anyway, um, so I love, when he's able to do things like I said, vacation. He's in the pool and he's swimming just like any other kid. He's going under the water and coming up laughing just like any other kid. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I love when I get to see him experience those things. I'm sorry. I was telling you about a normal day and I totally got sidetracked.
Yeah,
I'm the
you're fine.
worst.
I loved it.
So therapy in the morning from 8 until 9. At this point, staff has come in, they're finishing out therapy because they also follow through with things that they do in therapy, which is why I wanted the carryover in the time frame, right? And so like PT, when he first came home, he was used to laying on the floor all the time. So what does he do? He lays down on the floor. The minute you start doing anything hard, he lays down on the floor. So what we started doing was just having him sit up. Just sit. And he could sit, he just didn't want to, and his stamina was low. So staff, that's something they would do from the time that therapy ended to the time they took him to ABA. They'd help him, okay, you can play with that, but let's sit up while we play with it, just those kinds of things, helping to reinforce while I was at work. Then he'd go to ABA, and staff usually picks him up from ABA. Sometimes, depending on the day, I can get him sometimes, but usually they'll pick him up from ABA and bring him home. And then that's where I come home and I meet them at home and I do bath and bed and the last feed. And it's not until after I get him in bed in the evenings that I even eat dinner. On Wednesday nights, we have feeding therapy. So, Wednesday nights are later evenings for us because we're working on getting him to eat. And so she comes to the house and we try all kinds of different foods and different things. And that's my dog's favorite night because they come back in and they're like, yes, there's all this stuff all over the floor.
So when you say feeding therapy, you mean with his mouth? Like you're working
Mm-hmm.
on that. Okay.
Right. So feeding therapy has changed drastically over the last 3 years. Initially, feeding therapy, Emily, who went with me, she's also an occupational therapist. And so she started it before he even had insurance and was ready for anything. She came over and did what we called mouth torture. It's called a Z vibe, and it's like a pen, but it vibrates. And she'd come over and she'd stick it in one side of his mouth and she'd count to 5. And then he'd get to watch TV for 2 minutes. And then we do it again and count to 5 on the other side, watch TV for 2 minutes. And then, slowly the amount of time that it's being held in his mouth versus the amount of time he's watching TV kind of shifts from, being just a little bit to a lot to, half and half. And then it shifts to being more time in your mouth and just a little bit of TV. Because at that point, we were just trying to desensitize his mouth and help him get comfortable with allowing things. He came home I got him in August of 2022. He did not allow me to put a spoon to his mouth. And I say allow, but actually accept it. He did not accept me putting a spoon to his mouth until January of 2024. It took that long for him to even allow it.
So you mentioned that he got the G tube at 3 months. I wasn't really clear what happened that was the catalyst for that.
Because he was aspirating when they were trying to feed. And I think at that point too, because of the trisomy 21 and the lack of the oral muscle and all that, he was struggling with the sucking and swallowing bit. And they placed the G tube. And at that point, they also put that his vocal cords were paralyzed on his records. And so that's just what he stuck with. They fed him through a G tube.
Okay.
Until, he still feeds on G tube, but that's just what they did for, ever and ever. Amen. So he never learned functional use of his mouth. He still drools. If you see pictures, you'll see him in a bib. He still does a lot of drooling. It is significantly less than what it was. And now it's more of a stem because he'll go, and so it's like raspberries blowing spit everywhere. Sometimes when he gets really, really overstimulated, he drools, like the saliva's a lot and he can't control all of it. But when he first came home and we were changing his bib every like 30, 45 minutes, I mean, he was just pouring out of his mouth all the time, constant. I just got hit again.
I love it.
But, so that's another thing that, we've had to work on is oral muscles. What do you do when something's in your mouth? We know we can move it around with our tongue and chew it up. He doesn't know those things. So, just working on all of those. Is he eating yet? No. He, like last night, we had pudding and bananas and he swallowed a little bit of it. We got there little by little. If you look at where he was when he came home versus where he is today, he's a totally different child. And that's what I try to remind myself of. Because if all you look at is day in and day out, you think, my gosh, you're 8 and you're not even eating yet. Like, you didn't eat yesterday, you're not eating today. We're not, what progress are we making? But like I said, I try to stay focused on where he was. And then my biggest, I guess, goal or drive or
That's what I was
push.
so curious. Where do you see him going? Like, what do you?
So everybody asks that. Do you think he's going to talk one day? And my answer is I have no idea because the same way I refuse to put limits on him because you just don't know. The same way I don't want to necessarily assign or push, like, oh, yes, he's going to this, or that. What I want is for him to consistently gain independence, right? I want him to be able to do things for himself, not to make my life easier, but because he's 8 years old and literally controls none of his day. He chooses what toys he wants to play with, and if given the opportunity, what videos he wants to watch. Like, he has no control over anything because he can't do it for himself, so other people do it all the time. And sure, I can hold up two shirts and let him pick the one he wants to wear, but that's not as meaningful to his day as saying, hey, can we go through the car wash before we go to ABA this morning because I really love the lights in the car wash. Or do you know, like, he can't do those things. Or, hey, mom, I really feel like I haven't seen you much this week, can we watch a movie tonight? Like, those kinds of things he's not able to recognize or communicate or have any control over. And I want that for him. I want him to be able to control as much of his life as he can. So we want to build that independence. Communication is huge. The more he's able to communicate, the easier things are for him, the less frustrating it is, because he can let you know what he wants, what he's feeling. That's where a lot of the behavioral things come from. He does still self-injure. He will still pop himself in the mouth, not as frequently now. He'll pop himself in the ear. He's actually got a little scab right in here because he'll pop himself in the ear when he's upset. And we're working on things to change it, and it's significantly decreased. But imagine being 8 years old, not being able to tell anybody, hey, I was watching that, turn it back on, or like, it's tough. He
Friday.
does he does have an iPad, so we are working with a communication app on there, which is just, you hit the picture and it says the word. Right now it's very low tech. He also does the picture exchange communication system at ABA. So, he can take, like, the help card. We've got a cabinet that's got a lot of his super preferred toys in it. And he can there's a picture on it that's the sign for help, and he'll give it to me. And so I open the door for him and he picks a toy out. So there are certain things he can learn to communicate, and we're working on that. But we just want to continue to build. Do I think he'll ever live on his own? No, I don't. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
I was just about to say, how does that and it doesn't sound like in listening to your story that you spent any time thinking about that. When you were, like, making your columns of pros and cons, it doesn't sound and just in your voice and your attitude, it doesn't sound like you spent a single second saying, "How does this impact Whitney at 50?" You never thought of that question.
No, because all I saw was the opportunity for me. And I don't know how to explain it, except for, people who are dancers, and when they're, like, on stage or dancing, and they're in their zone and they're doing the thing that they love and they enjoy it. Or their practices where their toes are bleeding, or what, sure. But when they're dancing, it's their thing. It's what they're put on this earth to do, and they feel it in every part of them, and it brings them joy. And that's me. And and I hate to say being a caregiver, but this is the role I was put on this earth for. I was a caregiver for other people's children, that were not biologically mine before. And the only difference is now he's legally mine.
You come
But
across to me more as a guide. I feel like you're guiding him through his
mhm.
to help him find whatever the definition of his life is, just kinda helping to be that yeah, that guide. That's the vibe that I get
Yep.
just kind of from your story. And so what do you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to keep yourself from just losing it?
I'm probably the worst person to ask that. I've never left him overnight. I'm not good at taking care of me. I'm not. I will say that in the evenings, once he goes to bed and I eat my dinner, that's what I consider my me time. And this is going to sound really silly, but I turn on whatever I want on TV. That sounds it sounds silly, but sometimes I don't even want to watch what it is. I just turn it on and have the noise in the background because I can. And it's just kind of my time to not have to think about anyone else and their needs for a little bit. And yes, it's maybe an hour, but that's my me time. That's what I do. Like I said, choosing what's on the TV, what I'm eating, that's big too. I get to make this choice right now based on what I want, not on, well, what do I have to do? What's coming up in a couple hours and what's going on and whatever. So when I get to make those kinds of decisions and do those kinds of things, that's my me time. I'm not good at it, and it is my fault, but I enjoy being with him. I like hanging out with him. I like spending time with him. I like seeing him, even if, like, right now he's laying in my bed and looking at his hand. Like, I'm okay with that. I just like being with him. So I don't often go, hey, like my mom wants him to come spend the weekend at their house so bad without me. I'm like, what am I going to do all weekend if you take my son? What am I going to do? I don't know.
Just knowing your parents, I don't know how you have kept your mom with putting a moat around your house, how you have kept her from taking him from you.
Nope. We've gone and we've spent the night, but it's us together. And like she's coming, she'll come and stay here with us sometimes, especially if I've got stuff going on. They've been a huge support since bringing him home, but I won't let him go without me. And one of the things that I tell them, and this is very true, is that I don't know what he comprehends. I don't know what he understands. And I don't want to leave him at your house for the weekend and say when bedtime comes or that first morning I'm not there comes, and his body revisits that trauma of when he was abandoned in the hospital. He spent 3 months in the hospital with no consistent caregiver once his mom left him there, or that even when I got him one. I don't know that he cognitively remembers any of that, but his body does, and I don't want his body to relive that trauma and to send him back into it. So I told them I do think I'm at the point where finally I might let them come stay here and I go somewhere overnight and see how he does. But that's one of the reasons it's taken so long, because if there's anything I can do to avoid that feeling for him, I will.
And I've spoken to so many women. We've done a lot of podcasts about childhood trauma and just how much of it we absorb but don't acknowledge that we absorb. And so it's so good to hear you talk about it, that you recognize that it's there, even though he's not communicating to you that it's there. Because it is a thing. And so
Yes.
the last thing, and then I'll let you go because I just realized I have taken like way more of your time than you originally agreed to. So let's say that someone, either a single mom or a couple, is sitting home and they feel the same pull and they're fine. You kind of talked about your friend kind of getting the donation. How do you pay for all these therapies? How do you make it work every day?
So fortunately for us, like I said, he qualifies for the Cap C waiver, which is essentially a Medicaid waiver. So that covers a lot of the therapies, the equipment, things like that. But what I would say for anyone who's considering it and who thinks, because I did have this thought, what if he can't get as many therapies because I want to adopt him as a single mom, but if he had a double income home, they could pay for more therapies, that kind of thing. Though I'm not familiar with every state and how every state works, the resources are there. And the people who have lived it and have utilized those resources and have fought the good fight are out there. Probably aside from my personal friends and people close to me, the biggest asset that I've had in this journey has been the internet, social media, Facebook groups. There's a Medically Complex Parents of North Carolina group that has been a lifesaver. Those are the parents who have helped me navigate the medical part of things. And they'll tell you there's this grant, you can apply for this, you're eligible for this under this there. And this is here in North Carolina, but I'm sure every state has it. There are advocates for the medically fragile that will consult with you. We were initially denied for his Cap C, and the advocates for the medically fragile children, she worked with me for free through the appeal, and now we have services. So it's, if you're willing to put the work you hear him? If you're willing to put the work in to find it, it can be done. It may not be easy, it may not be the most convenient, but it can be done. And
That's
this
what I
is,
love about your story.
I said,
Is
this is, my life. This is why I adopted him, because this is what I wanted to do.
so if someone just feels led in their heart, the
Uh,
the, the world kind of group it like that will kind of help find a way. don't let fear that's what I hear, that you didn't even not one point of you telling your story did I hear you even pause and acknowledge that you should be fearful of something. Not that, "Oh, there could be a monster in the closet." You're like, "What closet? What monster? I'm walking over here." Like, it just was this very poised confidence that you knew exactly what you were going for, and I love that in your story.
That's probably the only area in my life where I do that, but yes.
I
But
love it. Well, I don't wanna keep you because I know you have an evening. Is there anything you wanna leave kind of the listener with if there's, like
so the one thing I would want to leave or do want to leave is if you're looking into something like this, or even you have a child that you're like, hey, I feel like there are some resources that we could be utilizing, but I don't know where to start. Even if I'm your starting point, hey, I heard you on this podcast, point me in the right direction. That's kind of, you have to jump at small straws, small pieces like that, because that's how you make those connections and get the things you're going to get to. So, number one, don't ever think that you can't learn from someone else. Even if it's just, that they connect you with someone else who has more knowledge or experience. Like, everyone has something to offer. So don't be afraid to reach out and kind of initiate and open up that door, and on the flip side of that, you have something to offer, for as many parents who have assisted me, I have done my part to turn around and also assist and support other parents and help make them knowledgeable. So everyone's got something to share. Everyone's got something that you know, they can help with. So number one, don't be afraid to ask and reach out, and don't be afraid to put your neck out there too and be like, hey, this is my life. This is my struggle. Maybe someone else can learn from it.
I have just loved I've kinda watched and heard your story from the sidelines, so it's just been such an honor to firsthand and to meet Nico, digitally and just to know that when God has a plan, he moves everything out of the way. And it's nice to see physical representations of that. I think sometimes as a believer, when it's talked about figuratively all the time, you're like, yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I believe it when I see it, but to see him and to hear your story, you can't help but acknowledge there was a much bigger plan in place, and just for your skill set and your not just the medical and the cognitive, and then I mean, he's got a lot of things going on, and to be able to balance those with such poise and love that you do, it would take someone like you, to do that, and so I am just so grateful for him that you have each other.
Thank you. And thank you, because everyone says he's so lucky to have you, and I always turn around with, I'm so lucky to have him. So thank you. I think that was perfect the way you said it.
I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in your eyes, and I can you are glowing like
Thanks.
it is your wedding day, this entire podcast, and I just yeah, I love that for you, so thank you so much. I said I
Thank
feel
you.
bad I kept you so much longer than I thought I would, but for your vulnerability, your transparency, talking about the hard things, I mean, I know when your parents don't support what you do, that's hard to accept, it's hard to talk about, and I love that as a family, you worked through it. The love brought you where you are today, and I just love that you shared all of this with us because my mom always tells me we're not special. There's someone else that's going through the same thing. Don't think you're special in your journey, and so I'm glad that you shared this so that someone else who's going through a journey like this doesn't feel like they're alone or they kinda have a light to kind of help them work through it, so thank you.